Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today we're going to take it all the way back to essentially what was the first episode of the show. I mean, there was technically one other one, but this was the real first episode. This is an episode where I revisit Transformers the movie. Before we get started, I just want to say if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. Transformers the movie is, by all accounts, a cult animated feature. This is a movie that, I don't know if it necessarily did horrible in theaters. I mean, looking at the animation, it doesn't look like it was that high budgeted, but it didn't do incredible. Not helped by the fact that it resulted in a lot of kids being upset. There was kids crying about this movie. Parents complained about how their kids were crying about this movie. So, it wasn't a big hit, but over time it's gotten much more of a fan base. I don't know if I'd say this is popular even to people who are not Transformers fans, because one, there's a lot of Transformers fans, and two, a lot of people who talk about it are Transformers fans. But I will say that this is a movie that definitely feels like, even if you're not a fan of Transformers, you'd probably find something in there that might interest you. It's definitely an interesting one. But before we get into all that, I do want to talk about why I'm choosing to revisit this. Now, originally I did want this to be the 100th episode, but I lost track of what I was even doing. So by the time we got to the 100th episode, I just completely missed it. And I kind of didn't want to do it again just because I was like, okay, well, I'm doing an episode on Transformers anyways, which has already been up. But eventually I was like, you know what? I'm rewatching Transformers anyways, the Transformers the movie. And I just thought, well, I'm already rewatching it anyways. Might as well talk about it because I love this movie. I really love this movie. It's dumb, it's stupid, it's cynical, it's clearly a cash grab, and yet it's kind of amazing. It's smarter than it needed to be, despite the fact that it wasn't even attempted to be smarter. It was definitely something that was just stupid, but it's just so damn brilliant. For those of you who maybe never saw my original video, and to be fair, I didn't even bother going back to it, so I may be repeating stuff because obviously I'm talking about the same movie again. The simple premise is pretty much this. If you're familiar with Transformers, you already know the whole Autobots versus Decepticons. In this movie, it takes place in the future from the original show, in the year 2005, where the main kid from the original show is already an adult and has his own kid, but while they do factor into the movie, they don't have as much impact as the kids do in like the live action Transformers movies, which is kind of funny to me. So instead, we're pretty much saying like, okay, this is where the Autobots are at this moment in time. The Decepticons are essentially winning the war, but the Autobots are making one last break for them to win the battle. Unfortunately, the Decepticons, led by Megatron, launch a surprise attack, resulting in the deaths of many classic Transformer characters. Even the leaders of both sides die, Optimus and Megatron. Not really a spoiler, this is very well known amongst people who know about this movie. And even if you hadn't seen this movie, this is likely one of the things that you probably heard about. Yes, within the first 20 minutes of the movie, Optimus and Megatron are killed off. A little longer than that, but that's generally where it happens. As a result, the movie is very much the story of two different war factions trying to survive and trying to see how they can move on from the deaths of their leaders, which I think is interesting, and I'll get to in a bit. And things get worse once it's introduced that there's another party involved here, which is this giant planet-sized transformer known as Unicron, often portrayed as like the devil or like the greatest evil in Transformers lore. Here, while he is definitely on the evil side, it's kind of interesting because he's just portrayed as this thing that is going around eating planets. And the only reason why he's even against the Autobots is because they have the one thing that can destroy him, a thing known as the Matrix of Leadership. Um, Otherwise, doesn't really care about them. He just goes around eating planets. So, by all accounts, it's a very simple, basic movie, and yet there's so many layers in terms of what they do. It becomes smarter than it needed to be unintentionally, because again, this was just made to sell toys. This was like the reason why they killed off a bunch of the characters. They've always been open about it. Is like, look, we wanted to sell kids new toys. We thought, okay, we're gonna kill off a bunch of these characters, and the kids will just latch onto the new people. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. A lot of kids got emotionally invested in a lot of these characters, especially the leaders, that they got upset that when they saw Optimus die. And the funny thing is that despite the fact that it was done under very cynical pretenses, they still gave Optimus this big emotional send off. Like when he dies, you got the sad music, you got the characters surrounding him, not sure what to do, and it's, it is very much like for a death that you clearly just did just so you can put in the new toys. You gave it this big send off that was like, it was emotional to a point that I'm kind of like, I mean, I get why you would be surprised that kids didn't accept it the way you wanted them to accept it, but at the same time, you definitely put in the emotion in there. So, like what happened there? This is one of those movies that I feel like the more times I rewatch it, the more I think about the stuff. It's very much because here's the thing: the way I view this movie is, aside from obviously being just another Transformers movie, is that it's less like your typical movie based on a TV show and more like, look, we took the property, but we're honestly just what feels like a pulp sci-fi kind of story. Like you can imagine reading this like in a magazine or something. Like a lot of the artwork in this movie feels like something that you would see like in an old sci-fi comic, or in some cases it looks like an anime. Having rewatched this movie who knows how many times now, I can definitely see the aspects where it feels like an anime movie. I don't know, it's definitely something where visually it was so different from a lot of what was coming out at that time. It's still fairly interesting to look at, even if the animation isn't the greatest, because the animation, while it's not as bad as the TV show, it's definitely a step up from it. It never really feels like, it's like as fluid as like a Disney cartoon or anything like that. Like it's very stiff by comparison, and yet it still looks great for what it's doing. Feels like something out of like an old sci-fi comic that, maybe wasn't exactly thinking about doing anything special, but they threw in some ideas that you read it now, or in this case, watch it, and you kind of realize, like, they clearly weren't thinking about this, but this kind of implies things that are much deeper than what is being presented, which is kind of interesting to look at, because you got like the whole war thing. Like as kids, we don't think too much about the war, and the fact that it's like, okay, well, this time we're gonna see some real casualties. Like, okay, well, that's a little more mature, and that's something that you don't often see with family features. The fact that it's like, okay, well, we're gonna actually see these two sides of the war and see how differently they handle the loss of their leader. Like the Autobots, they're like, okay, well, we just lost Optimus. Like all hope is lost. We don't know what to do. He put someone in charge who isn't even confident in himself, and as we find out later in the movie, wasn't even the right choice. Versus you have like the Decepticons who, on their side, the second Megatron is essentially kicked off, because pretty much like they had a chance to save him, but they were like, okay, well, we need to lose some weight, so let's kick off any of the Decepticons that are pretty much damaged from the battle, just so we can lose some weight. Starscream, Megatron's second in command, is of course devious enough to be like, okay, well, Megatron's kind of hurt, so he's not going to be able to fight back if I just throw him out. And as a result, they're like, okay, well, now we need a new leader, and they each start fighting for it. So it's like you got the side that cares about the leader and doesn't know what to do next, and then you got the side that doesn't really give a shit about who's in charge. They just each want to be in charge. And while it seems cartoonish to think about, it's like, well, yeah, there are different types of people, like in terms of how they react to the loss of some kind of leadership. Like it doesn't even have to be about war, so that's kind of interesting. Again, it's interesting that the movie's villain is Unicron, this planet-eating transformer who's like, well, yeah, he's evil in the sense that he eats planets, but at the same time, if he needs to eat planets in order to survive, you know, I don't know, like, what does that mean? Like it feels like something that they weren't thinking too much about yet. It feels like something completely out there because it's just like he's evil, but in a way he kind of isn't. And of course they do, of course make it clear that he is evil, but in a real world standard, it's like, I mean, he's at the end of the day just another creature who needs something to eat, and this is what it ends up being. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. One of the most known things is the soundtrack. I can't deny this is one of the most 80s soundtracks I've ever heard, and it's pretty fucking cool. Like, the songs in this are just great. The Touch, Dare, Dare to Be Stupid, Instruments of Destruction. Like, you got a lot of great stuff, and even the score in this is pretty great. Like, you have Unicron's medley playing almost every time he's on screen, and it always sounds interesting, especially as you see whether it's like stuff inside of him functioning or him transforming. It's just always great stuff. The scene where Optimus dies, has a very nice, memorable score. Sad. It really gives you the vibe of like, okay, yeah, someone's dying. It's just a bunch of great stuff. And again, I had to wonder how much of this was like, actually planned, because the score is kind of random when you get right down to it. Well, not the score, but the soundtrack. And as it is, The Touch wasn't even intended for this movie to begin with. It was a song that was intended for a Sylvester Stallone movie. I believe it was Cliffhanger. I could be wrong, but I know that it was intended for a Sylvester Stallone movie. They were just like, okay, we don't want this, so they took it over. And I don't know. It's interesting Transformer stuff. The Touch, of course, was eventually featured in the live action movies with Bumblebee. Not a very great use of it, if I'm honest, but it's still nice to see that it eventually got in there. And that in of itself, like, even if the rest of the movie was as dumb as what the people making this intended it to be, I think the music itself could have even still made it something that is worth watching. Because the thing is that I still remember the way I was introduced to this movie was, of course, aside from being a Transformers fan, was eventually seeing a lot of people, like, this was back around 2005, 2006, pretty much. It was before the first live action movie. We're starting to list it as like one of the all-time great animated features or something. Like, I probably wouldn't go that far, but it's still one that I love dearly, and I can see why others might put it in their list. And this kept on popping up, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a lot better than it had any right to be, and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so I'm curious. I mean, as one, I'm already a Transformers fan, and two, the fact that people are giving it this high praise just makes me want to seek it out. And thankfully, around that time, they were releasing it for like the 20th anniversary DVD. I got it, and it was definitely one where I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a little slow, if you're into like more modern animation and whatnot, you're gonna have to readjust yourself and remember, like, okay, well, this is like an 80s animated feature, not a Disney one, so like the animation is a little more stiff. The action is cool looking, but it's not gonna be this fast paced thing. It's pretty much what you would expect action animation from that time period to look like. But once you get that initial thought out of the way, I feel like it gets a lot better. In fact, I remember the first time I watched it, it was kind of like, yeah, this is kind of boring, but it's kind of cool in parts. And then the subsequent times where I would start watching it, it's like, okay, this is getting a lot better than I remember. And just little stuff, connected with me a lot more and more. Like, I've brought it up before. I thought it was kind of cool how they have this phrase that is like a universal greeting as a way to basically tell other people, like, hey, we're your friends. Don't hurt us, and hey, we'll help you if you help us, which is basically Bawi Grana Nini Bong. Ridiculous phrase, but it is cool to think, like, hey, what if we did have something where we could communicate with like people from other planets. Like even if we've never met them before, like if we try it and they understand what we're saying, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we're cool too." I think that would be a nice little way. Like it's sci-fi, but it would be like a nice idea, like an ideal for the universe. Like, hey, no matter where you are, no matter what language you speak, as long as you know this one phrase to indicate that you're safe and you're friendly, the other party should know, and you can work together, be good, help each other out, or maybe only they help you because maybe you're lost. I don't know. It doesn't matter. And of course, they do highlight in the movie like, hey, it won't always work, but just because it won't always work doesn't mean that it isn't worth trying, like with anything in life. And I think that's cool. Again, you get a lot of visuals that are very much like out of a sci-fi comic from like the 50s or something. I think it's great stuff. It helps create this world because I feel like with Transformers, like a lot of people often only think about it as like, okay, well, here's the robots and whatnot, and here's like metal planets and things like that, and in this you definitely see like more things. Like there's these beings called the Quintessons. They're like these tentacle robots. Very interesting stuff. Like they have their own court system where essentially whether you're innocent or guilty, it doesn't matter because you're pretty much dead. Um, we see other robotic planets to the point that yeah, it's a little weird that they have the human characters here. Like I said, they have the original human kid now as an adult. His name is Spike, and then they have his son Daniel. They I don't want to say they ruin the movie. They don't, but at the same time, they do kind of weigh it down. Where it's like, okay, well now we have to have this little moment where the kid is trying to catch up, and I kind of feel like you could cut them entirely and it wouldn't make a difference. But at the same time, I get why you're there. You got to have your human characters, especially at that time, to ground this stuff. You didn't really have to, but that's how they felt, and they don't ruin the movie in any particular way. At the very least, having Spike around means that Bumblebee is one of the few older Transformers in this that gets to survive, even if he doesn't really appear in the movie all that much. So that's kind of neat for Bumblebee fans, which is, a lot. And it's just cool, just all around, just seeing all this stuff. The voice acting in this is okay. I do think that they had a lot of celebrities in this that weren't really necessary, but I don't think any of them necessarily ruined the movie. Like, you have Robert Stack as Ultra Magnus, and he sounds fine. Eric Idle is in this briefly, even though he gets like the first credit in the opening credits. And again, it's like his voice, fits this weird otherworldly robot that they encounter. Like the one that probably stands out the most for anyone is Orson Welles, who plays Unicron, and they definitely had to modify his voice because he was already dying by the time this movie was getting made. It definitely sounds weird. Well, definitely sounds very different. Whereas the other ones, you can pretty much tell them right away. This is one where it's like you could tell, but it's very mechanical in comparison. And I think that choice, whether it was intended or not, and technically speaking, since it was only done because he was dying, wasn't really an intentional choice. I think it's great. It definitely makes Unicron feel a lot less human than the other robots, and the fact that Orson Welles pretty much didn't care doing this voice. Like you can tell right away that he's like, yeah, I mean, I'm doing this, but I'm just getting paid for this. It's an interesting layer to the whole thing because it really does make it feel like he's some kind of godlike being, just talking to these creatures that he doesn't have any real use for outside of just trying to survive. It just makes it all the better. Like when he's talking to Megatron, he gets some funny lines in there, like where he's like, "Oh yeah, it pleases me to be the first person to summon you," or like, "Oh, you have no way to bargain with me," and all that stuff. Because of the fact that he is as uncaring as he is in his delivery, it kind of fits Unicron being uncaring to Megatron and uncaring about his plight and just being like, look, you're just here because I need someone to protect me from one little thing. But realistically, you're nothing but a termite to me. You're useless. Even on this mission, you're pretty much useless to me. But you do have one specific use. So you're not entirely useless, I guess. I love that. I love how that goes around. And this is just the entire tone throughout the movie that he has. And yeah, the deaths in this, like going back to that, are entirely gruesome. Like when you see Autobots dying from like the surprise attack at the start of the movie, you actually see like the lights go off from like their eyes and stuff like that, and it's just like, man, this movie is brutal and uncaring about a lot of stuff. And again, it's like it's amazing that they thought that this was not like it wouldn't matter to kids, because it's like, well, you spend a lot of time with killing these characters and it feels intense. It's definitely not something you see in animation anymore, especially for family features. It just feels like this had to have been made at that specific time period for it to have worked the way it does. Because at the end of the day, it is a very messy movie. I would like, I'm not big on star ratings or anything like that, but out of like 5 stars, I would probably at most give it 3.5 stars, and that's mostly acknowledging all the silly stuff that I do like. And despite that, I still love the movie so much. I love it more than some movies that I consider almost perfect by comparison, just because it's such an interesting movie and the way it goes about doing everything. It's, I mean, it's Transformers the movie. I don't know what to say. I'm probably repeating myself from the first time I saw it, or maybe I'm not. I don't know, but I feel like, revisiting this was definitely something that I had to do, especially for the show. I would have loved to have revisited this with one other person, but I'm hoping that just by myself, you can get the gist that, okay, even if I'm repeating certain things, I do have an actual love for this movie, and I do highly recommend you watch it, even if you're not a Transformers fan, as long as you keep an open mind and understand that, yes, the movie is technically not the greatest thing around, but it's the ideas that make it so interesting. It's definitely more out there than your average animated feature. It's got things in there that feel more mature than whatever it's trying to be. It's got just themes and moments that feel like, yeah, this is dumb, but think about it for a little bit. And you might find yourself thinking that's kind of interesting. Even if you don't spend a whole afternoon thinking about just an idea that it throws out, you might just find yourself thinking, that's pretty cool, that's pretty interesting. I kind of wish that they had tackled it a bit more, but even if they didn't, it's interesting that they even tackled it at all, because not everyone is talking about these kinds of things. And I think that's pretty cool. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again next time.
Megatron? Is that you?
Here's a hint.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast. And give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/psycams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.